Hey everyone, welcome into this first episode of my interactive Planet Coaster tutorial. You might be wondering why I'm doing a tutorial almost a year after the release of Planet Coaster. Well, it's for a couple of reasons. One, there's already a ton of great tutorial videos that are out there on YouTube where you can learn a lot of different things. But I haven't found any yet that are completely interactive. So right now you can go to the Steam Workshop and you can actually download this park and you can follow along side by side with me as I recreate some of these things. So we have different design stations set up here. This first episode is going to be pretty rudimentary. We're going to just recreate a simple grid-based building, talk about things like hotkeys, which can dramatically increase the effectiveness of your, or I shouldn't say the effectiveness, but the speed in which you build. We're going to talk about some of the ways to add or remove pieces from a certain building. So this first episode might be, common knowledge for a lot of you. So if that's the case, I encourage you to download the park and then go ahead and skip to episode 2, where we're going to get into some more complex things. Like down here, we're going to do an entire section on using windows to create walls for buildings. We also get into some custom roof area, some custom domes. And then we're going to get into ways you can manipulate the path tool to create larger plazas, to create stepped up plazas, ways you can manipulate the terrain and path together. And then later we're going to have Mike Sheets come in and do a landscaping tutorial for us. In addition to those things, just basic, techniques that I commonly use, we're also going to talk about just different aspects of design. So the purpose of this tutorial is, one, to help you learn the common techniques that most YouTubers are probably using in their builds. And then 2, just talk about general elements of design, where the game excels and where it falls a little bit short, and how you can make up for some of those shortcomings. So yeah, go ahead, look at the link in the description of the video, download the park, and then we will get into the first. Alright, so this is our first tutorial, and it's just basic structures. So on the left we have a finished product. On the right you have all of the pieces that were used to create the building on the left. So we're going to go step by step and recreate this building, and you can follow along with me. Now this is a completely grid-based building, so it's going to use a grid piece to create the layout of the structure. Later on we'll talk about using pieces in a non-grid-based way to create some more custom work. But before we completely dive into this, I want to talk about hotkeys for a second. So if you go to the controls area, you're going to see all of the options for hotkeys here. So you've got your mouse controls, object placement, path stuff, terrain, coaster editing, building editing, general shortcuts, and a couple of the most common ones that I use. So one, Control Z is going to undo anything you just did. Control Y is going to redo what you just did. Control X will duplicate anything in the game, so I just hit Control X to duplicate that building. If you hit R, if you click on any structure and hit R, it's going to bring you into the edit mode. And then the other really common shortcut that I use is, if you want to get into the advanced move, you just hit X on any piece in the game, and it'll give you that. If you hit X again, it's going to get you to the circle mode. And one of the things here that I really didn't know about for a while that someone pointed out to me was another hotkey. So anytime you go into this sort of radius, circular advanced move, you can do it on an angle snap or without. Now I used to always come up here, do what I wanted, come here, turn this on and off. But actually, if you just hit the space key, it turns it on and off on its own. So again, this is just another way of increasing the speed at which you build. In addition to those things, Control X works the same way for individual objects as it did for that building we created. And then using Control Z and Control Y, there's a way to, because a lot of times with these hitboxes, what will happen is, and I think this building is probably not complex enough, but if let's just say we did we had another door here, and I was having trouble. Like, it's going to be easy for me here, but let's just say it wouldn't let me click on that door. Well, what I could do if I wanted to get to that piece to delete it, what I could actually do is go ahead and delete that one by right-clicking on your mouse, select that one, hit Control Z. Now that original door comes back, and now I just hit delete for the other door. So a lot of times if you get a bunch of pieces that are grouped together, it's really difficult to find the hitbox for the one that you want to either grab or delete, and that's a very common thing that I use in order to grab those pieces and then replace the work that I actually want to stay. So those are just a couple of common ones that I use. One of the other most common ones I think is the camera. So if you hit T on the camera, it switches from a rotational view like this, where you're pivoting around a certain point on the ground, or if you hit T again, it turns into a free move camera. Most of the time I build in a free move camera, but I know a lot of people use the rotation as well. So I know that there's other hotkeys that I'm probably missing, but honestly those are the ones that I utilize the most in building. So there's some general stuff for you. Again, this may be a complete overview of stuff you already know for some people, but I wanted to at least lay the foundation before we get into some of the more complex stuff here. So basic structures, let's go ahead and recreate this building. And I'm actually glad this popped up here because this is another good example of stuff that I often encounter in the game. So I just duplicated this building, and anytime you do Control X on a building, it's going to give you the advanced move for that. And if you look at this thing, the widget is all off, and that's because it's trying to find the center point for all of these random pieces, and it throws off the widget tool. So one thing you can do is you can use the world axis, and immediately it's going to align everything to the world axis. Now in this particular map, I have everything laid out that it's already on the global grid, but that's one of the things that can really come helpful. And honestly, anytime I'm building a structure, I try to build it just on the base grid in the game, if that makes sense. So instead of, if I had this building and its final placement was going to be like this, if I'm building inside of that, the widget tool is oftentimes going to have a problem where it's trying to point me in random directions. But if I build on the global grid to start with, so if I'm building and I'm not even concerned about its final placement yet, but if I'm building here and I'm moving some pieces around, I don't know if it'll cooperate with me here, but let's just see this, or maybe these pieces. Yeah, so if I want to move these pieces around, you can see that the widget tool is all messed up. But because I already have the building aligned to the world axis, if I do that, now I can move it along the building without it getting sort of out of whack. So don't be as concerned when you're building about the final placement of where you're going to put that structure. It's a lot easier if you just start out building on the global grid and then worry about where you're going to adjust it in the future. So that's a bit of a tangent, but let's go ahead and recreate this building. So the in-game options give you grid size and grid height. Now, typically I like to do grid height at 1 if I'm building a very simple structure like this, just because if you get too fine, you can get into a situation where you're maybe off by a little bit here or there. But either 1, 2, or 4 are the best when you're building just a simple grid. Obviously you get an option to go to a 2 meter grid size, so you can make this building a little bit smaller if you wanted to. Or what some people found out was that if you go into the roofs and do roof trims, there's a 1 meter ridge here. If you add that to the building, it's going to shrink the grid down to 1 meters. So this is a common thing that I use because we'll get into it later, but I find the scale of the game to be way too big. And so this is a very common thing that I use, and most YouTubers that you watch probably use as well, to sort of get things down to a more realistic scale. So we'll delete that and we'll go back to our 2-meter grid here. And actually for this purpose, I just want the 4-meter. So, and see, okay, so this is a good example of what can happen too. So I changed the grid around from the original piece and you can see that like none of these are on the grid anymore. So if that happens, just exit the building and then, well, we should use our hotkeys. So you see edit building R, so I'll use R. And now everything's back on the grid again. So this building is 3 wide by 2 wide. Now you can place these things individually like I just did there. Or another thing you could do is select these, hit Control D, which is I guess the other major hotkey that I use, duplicate it and do it that way. You know, this is an example where it's probably not a time saver at all, but that's just one thing you can do to try to increase your time. Where it is a huge time saver is if you want to add another story, you can do the whole thing and add it on top there. But this is a 1-story building. So that is our base structure. Next, if we look, we've got a little gable here. So we're going to add that. And another hotkey, Z, is a rotation of objects. So Z is rotation. You can, again, copy both of those. Control D to copy. I'm going to rotate it and put it back on that side. Next, we're using this roof piece, and I might have to adjust the grid height. No, it worked that time. Sometimes when you pull things from this menu down here, the grid can get a little wonky, and if that's the case and you're trying to line something up, then you just adjust the grid height. So you've got those. And we'll copy those and rotate them around. So again, this is a very simple structure. We're almost completely there. Now we'll take this thick wooden beam, which was used for an outline of sorts on the building. Now, a couple things to be aware of when you grab pieces like this. So let's just say I pulled it from, I went into the area where it's available and I pulled it like that. I'm not going to do it because it's a different color, but the thing is, if you're just moving it around freely like this, it's going to adjust to whatever imperfections there might be in the ground. So if you were to move it around, and let's just say there's a little hill or something right there, and you do the advanced move, well, it's possible that that thing is going to be out of sync. In fact, let me show you. I'm just going to create like a little bump here, which is not really that visible. But if you build in here, do Control D, and if I accidentally hover it over that, you can kind of see it move. Let's see if I can, yeah, so there. So if I accidentally put the advanced move tool on right then, and then I'm trying to use the angle snap, you can see that the end result is it's a little bit off. It's at an angle. So there's two things you can do to remedy that. You can either, anytime you have it, put it on the structure itself, so now you know it's going to be at a true right angle. Or if you have a piece like this, you can do the advanced move, and if you just do reset rotation, it's going to put it back on the proper grid. So we'll just use Control X to get the advanced widget tool. And we're going to the finished product. I kind of left it off, hanging off a little bit to give it some more depth. Then we'll bring it around there. And then what I like to do here to complete the angle is copy this piece. Always go to where the pivot point is. So copy this piece, and if we hit X again to bring up the circle, and then put that in place. Now, the thing that I like about this is because we did it that way, this piece is sticking out from the wall the same distance that this piece is. Now, that's probably getting a little ridiculous when it comes to sort of fine-tuning detail, but that's what I typically do. And then to complete the corner, I'll move that piece in a little bit, bring this one down a little bit so that the edges meet at the corner of the structure. Then what's nice is that you can copy this corner around. So you select all those pieces by holding Control and then clicking on all of them. Then you hit Control D, Z to rotate, bring it over here, put it into place. And then what I do there is I just click on that, right click to delete it, right click to delete it. That way you're somewhat mindful of your part count. Then Control X on that piece, bring it to the edge. Control X on this piece, bring it to the edge. Now you don't have to do that where it hangs off the edge like that. In fact, in this building I didn't, but I wanted to illustrate that sometimes you do want that. Like if you're making a corner of a building where, you know, let's just say it's something that your guests are going to see on multiple sides and you want it all to be even. That's a great way to accomplish that, where all the pieces are sticking out the same distance. But in this building here, I actually have these almost flush. And then we'll do that. Oops, yeah, that's fine. We'll do this. So now I'll do the same thing here to the other side. Control Z. And delete. And delete. You know what I just realized? So this is another thing, I'm actually glad this happened because it's another common thing that happens. So if I hit M, that's another hotkey that'll allow you to move. And if you look at the grid on the ground right now, what happened, and I didn't realize it as I was working, is this piece here actually is not in the same square as the other wall here. So if you look at it, see it's out. Sometimes that's to your advantage. Sometimes you might want it to stick out a little bit further, but most times I've found I want them to completely interlock like that, because when you get them on within the same square, what happens is the game turns those into a nice seam. So I'm not sure where I went wrong with that, but that's something that we're going to fix here. So the other way you can fix that is by selecting all of them, hold down Control, and then M. And so Control M allows you to move pieces together without changing their elevation. And actually it might not work for two. So Control M on one piece. Yeah. So it allows you to just sync it into the correct level. So I'm actually glad that happened, because you can see what kind of issues can typically come up here. Yeah, so we've got those, and then we'll just complete these together. So if you want to match these up, what I typically do is I'll overextend it, and then if you Control X that piece to get another one, and if you just bring it to the edge there, and then there, you're good to go. And Control X. All right, so we've got the base structure down. If you look at the example to the left, I also added this same detail a little bit further down, because looking at photos of these types of things, they're actually up off of the ground. So the door is not at ground level. There's usually a little bit of step up. Here's another example of the advanced tool being a little bit messed up. So go to world access. Now you're on the same grid as the building because your building is on the grid. So if we put that there, and then actually what I'm going to do to make this look more like trim instead of, oh, I didn't copy it. There we go. So I just hit X there instead of Control X, and that's why it didn't copy it. So we'll go around and copy that again. Now Control X will duplicate it and bring it to about there. And again, instead of sort of a gutter or a, you know, an overhang, I want this to look more like trim or something. So we're going to sink it in and just do that. For time's sake, I'm going to skip the back section, but you would do the same thing on the back. Okay, so at this point, we've used that piece, we've used that piece, and we're done using that piece. Next, I think we'll start with the door. So Control D to copy that. And so here's something too. This piece is upside down, so if you hold it on the surface and just hit the Z for rotate, it'll get you to the right direction. And then I'm going to hit X to get the fine tuning in where I want it. Now this door is probably a little bit oversized, so I'm actually going to sink it down just a little bit into that trim, and then we'll hide it with the step. So there's that. We'll take this piece and rotate it. That, hit Control X to copy it. And again. Okay, so the other thing you can do too is if you don't have the piece lying around, if we go into Windows here, and all you had was this door up, you hit Control X on the door. So right now it's a door, but then if you go in here and start selecting Windows, it's going to turn into whatever window you want it to be. So that's another way of doing it if you don't already have the piece waiting for you. Now, another thing that I'll do, instead of completely trying to eyeball the height of what the windows I want to be over there, I'll just take these, hit Control X. We'll go like that. I've got the angle snap on, so I want to go 45 degrees. Line it up. And here I'll just eyeball so that they're kind of centered, but at least then they're at the same height all the way around the building. So we've used that and that. These are pretty self-explanatory, and honestly there's not really, you know, typically it'll probably look something like that on the side of a building. You could also put these on the roof of like a flat building. But a structure like this, they're going to be on the side. And then we'll do the stairs here. Now again, these stairs are a little bit overscaled, so we'll just bring them down to the correct height. And actually I'm going to do that so I know that they're level across. And then I'm just going to sink them into the building a little bit so that they makes sense from a scale standpoint that way as well. And then now I'm not going to grab from over there because I want to use, it's a lot easier if I just use this. So we'll go here, leave that metal platform, yeah. So now I don't have to make as many fine-tune adjustments if I just copy it off of the piece that I already placed. So we'll put that there. And then we're going to search for fence. So you got this 2-meter fence from over here. And same thing, we're going to go off of there. So select it, hit Control X, and then select the new piece you want. Raise it up a little bit. Now I want this piece, so again, we're selecting that instead. Rotate it. Line it up a bit. There. Now, if you really wanted to make it look flush, you can go to there and then go one more so that it's looks like that piece is actually attached to the building. So that's just a little detail. You know, most people probably aren't going to notice it or look at it, but it really does finish it off and make it look like it's, you know, structurally more sound than if you left it the other way. Then the only other piece here is, I always can't remember where these ones are. I think they're in scenery. Yep. So you take an iron girder. Again, hit Control X on any piece there, and then just select the new piece you want. Hit X to get rotation. And this is something we're going to get to later in the tutorials as well when we talk about color. But if you look, so right now, this color is obviously much darker than these. So what I'm going to do is just lighten it a little bit. So we'll go here. And that's probably good enough. All right, and you're done. So again, a very simple structure, but that's the basis for how the grid-based building system works. You know, you can create a lot of fantastic structures in your park by utilizing that, and it's a great way to start. So if you are unfamiliar with how to do stuff like that and all you've been doing is just downloading from the workshop, it really is a ton of fun to get into the game and build those things yourself. The only other thing, and this will be a quick tutorial that I'll show you, is adding and removing scenery to a building. So if you click on this, you can see that right now this tree, because it's outlined, is attached to the building on the left. So what you want to do here is remove this tree from this building and add it to this building. So we've got this building selected. If you hit R to get into the build, select this building, the birch tree here, and go up here and you have split from building as an option. So now this building is still self-contained and this tree is its own scenery piece. Now, sometimes you might want a piece to be on its own, you know, and typically it'll be with like your landscaping and things like that. You might want it to be a standalone piece so that later on, if you want to go through and delete stuff, you can just click on individual objects and delete them. But a lot of times you might want a tree to be a part of your structure, or, you know, some other scenery objects you've created, like maybe you made a fountain that you want to be a part of a building. Just for the simplicity's sake of being able to move it around or relocate it or turn it, whatever it may be, I find it's helpful to have some stuff set within a building structure. So to add this to this building here, what we're going to do is click on it. Actually, with this, so down here you've got a little sort of selection tool. So we're going to click on that building. We're going to hold down Control and click on that building. What that does is you see it pops up a little tree here with a plus, and so it says add standalone scenery to the selected building. So we'll add that, get out of this, select the building again. Now you can see this tree is a part of this building. Now, the other way that I find this really helpful, so we'll go ahead and remove this from the building. Again, so you've got a tree here, hit Control X to duplicate it. Let's say you have a little scene of trees that you want to save. Well, all of these are individual, so what I typically will do if I want to save it as a building to move around, go to Building, Columns, and you can use any grid piece for this. I just like the columns because they're easy to sink in and hide, and you could probably do a 2 meter. Sink it below ground, and then go back to this, Control to select all those. Now I've got that building piece. I'll add them to the building. Hit Control X. I can duplicate that around. I can rotate it. Things like that. So this can be useful, but when we get into design techniques, one thing we're going to talk about is not just spamming your park with a bunch of trees and a bunch of plants and, just basically not doing this. Now there might be examples where you would want to duplicate some scenery. Maybe you duplicate it and then you get into this building and you say, I'm going to replace this with a different type of tree. Maybe I'm going to add one of those in there. So, or whatever it may be. There's reasons you would copy it around, but generally speaking from a design standpoint, we'll discuss that and how you wouldn't want to just completely copy around tree groupings all over your park. But we'll bring in the expert landscaper for that in a couple of episodes here. So anyway, that is the end of the first episode. Very basics. So if you didn't already know how to do this stuff, now hopefully you know some of the hotkeys. You know how to build a building on the grid and know how to group scenery or ungroup scenery together. So in episode 2, we're actually going to learn how to do some more advanced building techniques, and we're going to begin by using windows to create custom walls. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in episode 2.